So there's a lot of interpretations of The Shining. Whole documentary even. I haven't even seen the documentary, but that's only because I may already have read a lot of what it espouses online. That wouldn't make the documentary irrelevant for others who did more productive things during their adolescence. Is that possible, actually? Though I'm in a weird place with The Shining speculation discourse. Here's the thing. It isn't unreasonable to assume a lot of what Kubrick placed in The Shining was not circumstantial or throwaway. Origin story of The Shining. Kubrick lost money on Barry Lyndon. The great precise artist of legend decided that, contrary to myth, he needed some cash. That's the origin story of The Shining. The one then recent best-selling horror novel he didn't just throw at the wall in frustration, according to his secretary, according to Vincent Lobrato, apparently. Now there's a lot of legend writing and speculation where Kubrick is concerned, obviously. We can only take some of these alleged anecdotes so seriously, though, let's face it, that's part of the fun, and we wouldn't be watching and talking about these films if it weren't, right? So Kubrick figures this would be a nice, prosperous production for him to embark upon, and also, he is rather supposedly captivated by the submerged darkness behind a modern post-war American family. But then he thinks, is it post-war, post-nuclear, or is it more timeless to America? What's submerged beneath the American man? What's the first story of the American man? The slaughter of the native peoples. What's submerged beneath that? A European heritage, an aspirational longing for the perpetual relevance and posterity of the ancient Greek mythological prose. Take that yarn involving the Minotaur and the Labyrinth. Hey, America also has the residual trauma of the African slave economy, the inhuman savagery of the settler era. Families have been vaguely dysfunctional or potentially insane all throughout post-colonization American history, with or without the atomic bomb or 20th century combustion engine modernity in general, maybe. Maybe the presence of the supernatural need not even be, actual, but wait, might it as well? It isn't that Kubrick believes in ghosts or the potential of life after death. Author Stephen King claims that Kubrick was coldly atheistic, according to a phone call they shared once, but he feels as though, with the residual psychological hex of violence and unethical acts lurking beneath the surface, might these ghostly spectres essentially, would it make more sense if they existed? It is important to recognize that the ghosts don't influence or craft Jack's instability, they simply enable what is already innate. Also, Kubrick probably saw Rogues Don't Look Now, which saw the timeline of a circumstance, Donald Sutherland's character's excursion to Venice, gradually bleed internally into itself until spiraling into a fatally entropic slice, spilling across lineal chronological time. Several very poised and overt instances of relevant dialogue are informing towards said set of ideas. Mentions of the Donner Party cannibalism, Indian burial ground, and fighting off enraged natives, the entire presence of Dick Halloran in general, his dialogue about past horrible events having impact on a space across perceived time, whose ethnicity I'm not sure was specified in King's original text. The revealing that Tony is from the future, made more clear in the novel, I believe, and maybe helped inspire also Kubrick to have time closing in on itself at the Overlook Hotel, or the Overlook Hotel as a Borgesian aleph of America in general. Speaking of Borges, the Minotaur, and a story you don't realize is from the Minotaur's perspective until the end of it, how the Minotaur found himself in the maze, in that trap, rather than how he was eventually killed. Speaking of Borges, a director takes a very specific idea composed by a writer, King, and transforms it into something totally encapsulating potentially all of the language's culture up to that point, or attempting to be the most creatively ambitious film ever made while still staying maybe vaguely true to the sourced story. As Nicholas Roeg had to Donald Cammell's narrative idea for 1970s performance, as at least consciously attempted anyway, Borgesian as a film has been, without outright adapting the author directly. And then there were some, like Pauline Kael, who claimed Roeg's later Don't Look Now, aforementioned, was the most Borgesian film ever made at that time, and more seamlessly and subtly so, rather than with what performance must have been considered, presumably. Which is the closest film to or like The Shining before The Shining? Or Polanski's film The Tenant. That's traumatizingly creepy, that one. A few films are more worthy of speculation than The Shining, considering how careful and particular Kubrick was with designing the set as an incongruent, unfeasible, architecturally bizarre labyrinth, one can consider the screenplay to be at least as chosen, considered, deliberated, and devised as the production/art design. The speculation upon the secrets of The Shining are warranted, in my opinion at least. Anyway, at least before you get to the moon landing, and, well, that's, getting in a little bit beyond speculation on an artist's intent with a movie, and more into the cover-ups at a macro level, allegedly, as in definitely not, on an international ultra-covert scale. Of that we have no proof. But for Kubrick's intent to realise more than just a surface-level edged-weapon horror romp with some supernatural overtones, far more than King's already admired novel even, there's no reason to assume that the evident decisions made in The Shining were throwaway, especially when Kubrick departed so assertively from the novel, when, if this were a more cynical endeavour, he just would have adapted the novel. Changes are made out of convenience usually, which Kubrick's don't appear to be. Even the closing explosion, potentially costly, but more certainly profitable American audiences anyhow. Oh, and I tend to dislike, I've said this prior in one of these Kubrick videos, I am quite sure, the tendency to insist upon the absolutely meticulous and highly manicured nature of Kubrick's films. It is used to justify why others, namely the insecure claimer of these facets of Kubrick's artistry, ought not to make films. It is too much work, a boring, methodical, conservative process. Don't try, or not without following a highly rigid, careful formula, just like Kubrick had. Then explain Here's Johnny, or more specifically why Kubrick kept it in the film, please. It is an organic, initially formal, but also relatively informal process of artful creative experimentation and analysing and trialling and erroring. Now, to tie that in with Kubrick's intents with The Shining, what we have been talking about in this write-up here, it isn't that Kubrick had a master plan with The Shining, but ambitions, maybe loose and vague, or let's say ethereal. But he had his intents. Not a secret Bible which entombed all of the hidden meanings of the film, not some code he followed absolutely robotically, unshakingly, but a meaning he felt the film could be imbued throughout with, that could plausibly shine through, because, let's face it, if it was more didactic it would be quite banal, if it were less it would be as though Kubrick hadn't these ambitions at all. What makes these aspirations exist is us having recognised them, much like the haunted residue which has cursed the characters of The Shining itself. If not for 2001, this would be Kubrick's masterpiece. That will be my final claim in this upload.